Friends, hello. This is an attempt to understand the structural reforms being brought in by Prime Minister Modi. We get to see various shades of opinions, some shrill, some objective, and most of it get drowned in the noise and din that's being created. Let's try to understand the historical evolution of this sector, the regulations therein, the need for those regulations, and the need, most importantly, for the reforms that Prime Minister Modi has been doing. During the Second World War, the Defence of India rules came into play, 1943, given the backdrop of a severe famine, of a World War II shortage. It was only natural that the most essential commodities, being food, was being regulated. That formed the basis for the ECA, Essential Commodities Act, in the mid-50s. The intention was noble, trying to make sure that the essential commodities, which food during those days, even now for that matter, are available to the common man, especially in the backdrop of severe tragedies, be it a World War II, be it a partition, be it repeated famines. The country went through severe such crisis going forth into the next decade as well. The 1960s saw a situation wherein we had to import food under PL 480 from the USFA. In these backdrops, having a strict regulation in the form of an ECA made sense so that the black marketing, the hoarding of food items are prevented, and therefore the severe rise in food prices are controlled, and the common man is assured at least of a decently available food grains for himself and his family. On the other hand, you had large number of farmers, people who had very little land holding, could be half an acre, 1 acre or 2 acre, and who had very primitive, so to speak, technologies of farming. And for one, the scale economies, given the lack of it rather, didn't allow them to use better technologies, and even the availability was a concern as well then. That being the case, the intent of the APMC Act, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Act, was to ensure that the farmers get a decent return for the hard work, the labor that they put in generating these food grains. So therefore, if you look at these two regulations, one trying to protect the consumer part of it, the other trying to protect the farmer, made immense sense, and it was very meaningful as well. Situations do change since the 1960s and 50s, when we had a huge scarcity based economy wherein we had to import food, to today wherein food grains are overflowing in our godowns. The food grains are so much led to waste and rot in rains, and it's a miserable situation wherein you produce more but you're not able to export, you're not able to consume, worse still, you're not able to store. So this being the case, the context in which the acts were passed, the ECA acts, wherein it controlled the stocking of food grains to ensure that there was no undue food grains price rise, and the APMC trying to give a channel of marketing which was supposed to be fair, reasonable, and helpful to the farmer. But in the change situation, you get to see that the things actually went over the board. In the shortage economy, control on food grains is important and meaningful, but in a abundant economy where you have huge amount of food grain production, your inability to store them, process them is actually a curse rather than being a boon. So today, look at the situation. There is a farmer, a poor farmer, who puts in a lot of his efforts, endeavors, takes a huge amount of loan at usurious interest at times, puts his labor, his family's labor, and produces some amount of food grains, primarily for subsistence basis. And what happens is, unfortunately, he is not able to sell it anywhere outside of the APMC channel. The reason, the government believes that he cannot sell anywhere outside of the APMC for the reason that they believe they can give the best price to him. That was the pre-reforms, pre-91 days, wherein probably it made sense. But today's world, wherein you have massive corporations working in food processing, in logistics, in processed food business, and probably in exports, the farmer is not able to reach out to that segment of buyers is a big curse to them. Worse still, the people who are supposed to protect them, the small number of traders in the APMC committee, ensure that they pay very little to the farmers and probably charge a bigger price to the retail consumers. So in summary, what do you get to see? On the one hand, the farmers don't get enough money for the produce that they make. On the other hand, the consumers have to pay a higher amount of price for the food grains. And there is another set of buyers willing to sort of buy probably even at a higher price to the farmers, but they are not able to access it because of the regulatory block. The only ones who benefited out of this is those small number of traders and the middlemen who conned both the farmers on the one hand and their retailers on the other hand, and blocked the other segments of buyers from purchasing, thereby which would have got into a good competitive situation. The 1991 economic reforms was a watershed moment in the Indian economic history, as we see. It opened up the economy, opened up enough and more opportunities for our youth, for our entrepreneurs, for youngsters who are willing to take risks and come out with a product or service of their own. But the only sector or the segment that didn't open up, unfortunately, was the farming sector. Close to 15% of GDP comes from the agricultural sector, but roughly about 60% of the Indian population is dependent on it. It is this irony that probably made our Prime Minister look at the things in the right perspective. The 2018-19 Agricultural Standing Committee report made it abundantly clear that the existing structures were not at all effective. In July 2019, 7 chief ministers were constituted into a high-powered committee to look into these agricultural structural reforms issue. And the outcome of that were the 3 ordinances that came on the 5th of June 2020. One, to make an amendment to the ECA, Essential Commodities Act, wherein except for very severe situations, it could be a drought, it could be a famine, it could be a very severe natural vagaries, or probably a war, right? Except these 4 situations, the traders were allowed to stock as much as they would want to, number one. Number two, the APMC Act, in a way, what that was throttling the agricultural sector has been unshackled, which means while the APMC channel still is available to any farmer if he is interested, it opens up an opportunity for them to sell it to anyone that they would want to. It could be at the farm gate, it could be at the factory premises, it could be at warehousing, wherever it is. And most importantly, it allows the farmer to sell beyond not just the APMC yard, but outside of the district and even outside of the state. A farmer sitting in Karnataka can sell it to someone in West Bengal, and vice versa. Someone sitting in a farmer from Uttarakhand can sell it to a buyer in Tamil Nadu. So this opens up a huge amount of market, and in a way it leads to a real price discovery. The price discovery wherein the farmer gets his rightful due. So now what is this whole drama about? All this whole noise that we get to hear about. The third thing that the Prime Minister has got into the agricultural sector reform is ensuring that the contract farming is allowed. What does this mean? The farmer can enter into an agreement with a buyer at the start of a season and say that he is assured of a particular price. So which means to say, earlier it would so happen that the farmer as an entrepreneur took all the risks. He had to take loans on his name, he had to sort of do the labor himself or employ labor, and at the end of it still the price was completely controlled, the channel was completely controlled. All that Prime Minister is ensuring is his risk is drastically reduced because of a contractual obligation to have a better price for him, more amount of buyers available outside of the APMC as well, and most importantly allowing the buyers and traders to have big stocking and logistics warehouse facilities that will allow them to buy more, process it, and probably trade it with the consumers either in India or abroad. In this context, what is this noise all about? You get to hear people talking about how the country, the farmers are being affected by these reforms. At one level, it's only a pure political reaction to a big structural reform. We saw that in 1991, and we get to see this once again, wherein the vested interests are the ones who are making the biggest noise. The consumer is benefiting because the buyers, large in number, with their ability to sort of do the logistics and warehousing, will cut down the wastage from about 15 to 18% to less than 8%. in which case the prices are bound to come down. The consumer is better off. On the other hand, the farmer gets to be better off because he gets a better price given the fact that the middleman's cut is completely reduced or drastically reduced. So it is a situation wherein earlier the farmer would lose and the consumer would lose, only the middleman would benefit. By flipping the structure, the Prime Minister has ensured that the consumer benefits and the farmer benefits, but the middleman loses. No wonder you get to see the vested interest, the middlemen and the small number of traders who immensely benefited from the earlier structure making the noise. There has been another cause for concern, or at least so-called cause for concern. Now that the market is opened up, the prices may go up and down, in which case the MSP, the minimum support price for the farmers, would be removed. That would going to be detrimental for the farmers. But just to make things clear, the Prime Minister has repeatedly assured that the MSP, if anything, is an important component of the structural reforms. When the prices go up, the farmers benefit, and when the prices crash, the MSP is there to support them. So it's a win-win situation for the farmers in both situations. If you want to look at an example of a hypocrisy, nothing could be farther than this. The general elections in 2019 saw the Congress come out with a manifesto which said that they would make these kinds of structural changes, exactly what Prime Minister has been doing. So it is very evident for a common man to see that this noise against the structural reforms is purely for political expediency and not at all in the interest of the farmers. So if you want to summarize this, you get to see one thing. Initial shortage situation, there were restrictions on the stocking of the food grains, and to ensure the welfare of the farmers, the APMC was there to procure food grains from them. But in the change abundant economy situation, it's only natural that you must have more number of buyers. You must have buyers who are not just outside the village, but outside of their city, their state as well, and allowing them to do a contract farming wherein the farmer is definitely better off given the fact that they have an assured price. If you look at the amount of suicide that we get to see in the farm sector, this is only a natural and an absolutely required step taken by the Prime Minister. The hypocritical statements of political leaders is extremely tragic given the fact that they have themselves promised to the voters that they would bring these regulations, and now when the regulations are being brought in, are being critical of it for the sake of political expediency. If you compare the 91 situation with today, the 91 was a watershed in terms of economic reforms, and 2020 in terms of agricultural structural reforms would be even bigger. It's going to impact millions and millions of our farmers, close to 60% of the rural population who are dependent on this. So this being the case, think for yourself why these structural reforms are required and who they are going to help, and most importantly, who they are hurting. And these are the people who are making these noise. Thank you.